As we mentioned, the littoral area is the area in the lake that there's a tremendous amount of production of a variety of plants. If it's a eutrophic type of habitat, these plants are most apt to be rooted higher aquatics called macrophytes. They're also known as pleuston. We're filming this segment in a portion of Keuka Lake that is probably more swamp than lake, but we're using it as an example, an outstanding example, of the types of macrophytic vegetation often associated with a littoral area. Now remember, we're talking about that portion of the littoral area called the eulittoral area. That is where rooted aquatic vegetation exists. You have all types in here, or at least the types we want to discuss today. You can break macrophytes basically into three categories. Those that are considered emergent, those that are considered floating vegetation, and finally macrophytes that are considered submergent vegetation. Among the emergent types, there are three that dominate. The first one is TYPHA. Those are the cattails, and as you can see, lining this whole eulittoral area, this swamp type area, are cattails. They're very, very dominant, obviously emergent. The second type, in some situations, can be dominant. These are the bulrushes or Serpis, genus Serpis. The third type is not present in this particular habitat, but again, it can be fairly common in some littoral areas, and that's arrowhead or Sagittaria. This particular area we're filming at is prime for the second major category, and that's floating vegetation. Surrounding me right now are the two major types of floating vegetation that we find in eulittoral areas. NYMPHAE, the lily pads, probably one of the more attractive types of aquatic plants, of macrophytes. They have a beautiful flower or bloom in late spring and early summer. And growing right next to it, Potamogeton or pondweed. There's nothing very attractive about Potamogeton. Most people think of this as a scum-type weed. It is very often associated with a hyper-eutrophic habitat. The third category of vegetation, of macrophytic vegetation associated with the eulittoral area, is the submergent variety. Some of that grows in here. It's not as obvious because the water's rather muddy. The main reason it's muddy now is we have hundreds and hundreds of large carp behind us that are spawning in this area, and they're riling up the bottom. They're creating a lot of mud and also causing havoc for the largemouth bass population in here. And so you can't see the Elodea clearly because it is submergent. But Elodea is one of the dominant types, also known commonly as a type of pondweed. The other type of submergent vegetation is actually not a higher-rooted aquatic plant. In fact, it's a very primitive plant. It's a blue-green algae. The genus name is Chara, but we include it in this category of littoral vegetation because it grows on the bottom. It's submergent, but it almost looks like it's rooted into the substrate. Emergent, floating, submergent. Those are the dominant types of vegetation found in the eulittoral areas.